All right, looks like we're live on Zoom, but we're not going to start just yet. We'll wait for about 5 more minutes before we get started. Most of our participants today are going to be on Zoom. I appreciate people being here in person. Thank you for being here. I have 6 people on the Zoom so far. Right, it is 1 o'clock. So Christine, do you want to give me the go ahead to get started on Zoom?
We're looking good.
Okay. Hey, well, I think we'll go ahead and get this started. It's awfully quiet in this room, so I think it's time for somebody to start talking. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here today. My name is Jeannie Mesha. I'm the Senior Environmental Scientist Supervisor of the Ocean Desalination Team at the State Water Resources Control Board. And we're here today to talk about potential amendments to the seawater desalination provisions of the California Ocean Plan. And oh, you know what? I need to start the presentation. Good, that allowed for one more person to attend in person before I started. Okay, how is that? Christine, can you give me a, let me know if the slide looks okay on Zoom?
It looks fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so again, we are here to talk about the potential amendments to the seawater desalination provisions of the California Ocean Plan. Before I start, I'd like to introduce the team that is working on this. We have Gintara Huckabee. She's an environmental scientist on the team. Christine Manhart, an engineering geologist. Bobby Hyla, a Sea Grant Fellow. Jonathan Williams, a senior environmental scientist specialist. And David Fairman, a senior engineering geologist, hydrogeologist. And I want to recognize that this work would not be possible without them. So greatly appreciate their help with everything. So the purpose of today's meeting is to explain the potential topics that we're considering for amendments to the seawater desalination provisions. We want to hear your feedback on these potential topics, and we also want to hear feedback on any other topics you think are important for us to consider for the amendments to the desalination provisions. Want to point out that this is not a CEQA scoping meeting. We are just at the beginning stages of developing the amendments. So we're in the process of gathering feedback to inform the amendments that we will eventually propose to the State Water Board for consideration. We'll have a CEQA scoping meeting that will likely be next year when we have actually developed amendments to the provisions. So before I get into the presentation on the topics, I want to go over some meeting logistics. This meeting is being recorded, and we will take a short break after I'm done with the presentation. It'll be about 10 minutes, and then we'll accept comments. If you are here in person and you would like to comment, please sign in on the sign-in sheet in the back of the room. And if you would like to comment virtually, you must be in the Zoom meeting. So if you're currently watching this on the live webcast and you would like to comment, please register for the Zoom meeting and go there to make a comment online. The link for the Zoom meeting is in the public notice for this meeting. It's also on our website. And if you don't have either of those handy, you can email the email on screen and somebody will send you the Zoom link. Yes. Yes, the question was for people who couldn't hear that, will the presentation be posted online? And we will post it online within a few days from now. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Here's the outline for today. I'm going to start with a short primer on desalination in California. And then I'm going to give some background on the California Ocean Plan and the seawater desalination provisions. I will then talk about our goals for the potential amendments, and then I will go into the topics. Then we'll take a short break, and then there will be opportunity to comment. Okay, so this slide provides a little bit of information about seawater desalination in California. It is being used in the state to supplement municipal water supplies. Most facilities are in the Central Coast region, which is the green shaded part of the coast on the map that you see on the screen. And most of the rest of the facilities are in Southern California. Desalination uses various designs and technologies extract seawater, such as open water intakes and subsurface intakes. And then most seawater desalination facilities use reverse osmosis to desalinate the water. The process of desalination creates a hypersaline brine waste that is typically discharged into the ocean. And this affects, so both the discharge of brine waste and the intake of seawater affects marine life. We categorize seawater desalination separately from brackish groundwater desalination. And this is mainly because seawater is saltier than brackish groundwater and typically has greater environmental impacts than brackish groundwater desalination. All right, so a little background on the California Ocean Plan. It was first adopted in 1972. It has gone through several amendments and revisions since then. It was last revised in 2019. The full title of this plan is the Water Quality Control Plan for Ocean Waters of California. I'll be using Ocean Plan or California Ocean Plan throughout the presentation. The purpose and authority of the plan is to protect the quality of ocean waters for the use and enjoyment by people of the state by controlling the discharge of waste and intake of seawater according to the provisions in the plan. So we use the term provisions to mean the legal requirements that people must follow when they propose and implement activities that affect or use ocean waters. So it's provisions is synonymous with requirements. So the Ocean Plan has provisions for a bunch of different activities, including desalination, which is what we're here today to talk about. The State Water Board adopted the current seawater desalination provisions in May, are primarily contained in Chapter 3 of the Ocean Plan, provide a consistent framework for protecting marine life for both owners and operators of desalination facilities and the water boards. Provisions implement Water Code Section 13142.5B, which I'll talk about on this slide. So this is the Water Code Section 13142.5B in full, and it says, for each new or expanded coastal power plant or other industrial installation using seawater for cooling, heating, or processing, the best available site, design, technology, and mitigation measures feasible shall be used to minimize the intake and mortality of all forms of marine life. So the desalination provisions in the Ocean Plan, they describe the factors that the water boards will use to review to determine that a proposed desalination facility is using the best available site, design, technology, and mitigation to minimize the intake and mortality of all forms. Then we are considering amendments to the seawater desalination provisions is because it was a recommendation in the 2019 triennial review of the California Ocean Plan. Also included in the 2022 water supply strategy that was released by the governor's office in 2020. So for people not familiar with the water supply strategy, it contains goals for creating and developing new water supplies for California to adapt to a hotter and drier conditions in the state. And what the directive is for the State Water Board specifically was to develop criteria. There's a number of actions for the State Water Board, but related to seawater desalination, the strategy directs the State Water Board to develop criteria for facilitating approval of desalination facility permits and to consider amendments to the seawater desalination provisions to streamline permitting for projects that meet the recommended siting and design standard. State Water Board staff has completed the first directive of the water supply strategy when they finished the seawater desalination siting and streamlining report to expedite permitting in June 20. Finalized it in December 2023. I worked on this report with other agencies to come up with recommendations for expediting permitting for desalination facilities. Some of the key recommendations from this report were to site facilities in locations where preferred technologies can be used. This likely result in fewer environmental impacts and therefore require less mitigation and likely less time for regulatory review and therefore the possibility for a quicker permit. Another recommendation was to do concurrent agency review rather than sequential agency permit applications. Another recommendation was to conduct meaningful outreach. This is a priority for the State Water Board. It's also a priority for the state as a whole. And in a timely manner. And also a recommendation was to make sure that there is a secure plan before the facility is constructed and operating. So we're building on and considering these recommendations in the development of the potential. Our goals for the desalination amendments are to support the use of desalinated water under an integrated water resource management approach. And basically what this means is managing water in a way that considers environmental and social impacts, as well as all the different tools and mechanisms for conserving and creating water, and also responsibly using water. We also want to improve coordination and engagement with California Native American tribes. We also want to address the state's human right to water law and ensure that racial equity and environmental justice are appropriately and sufficiently considered in both the permitting process for desalination facilities, but also in the process of developing these amendments. We want to keep working to protect marine life and water quality by providing a uniform statewide approach to permitting and adding new requirements where and if necessary. And we also want to make permitting of seawater desalination facilities more efficient by providing clarity on existing requirements and increasing our collaboration with partner review agents. So here is our list of potential amendment topics, or this is the list that I'm going to discuss today. Yep. So I plan to go through each one of these topics. And I just want to say this is not a final list. We're considering recommendations on these topics, and the State Water Board has not made any decisions about these topics at this time. Where we go with this list depends a lot on the feedback we get during this public comment period. So basically, this is a preliminary list. It's designed to elicit feedback and discussion. Okay, well, I'm going to jump into topic number 1. And this is identified need for desalinated water. So there is currently a provision in the ocean plan that requires owners or operators to consider whether the identified need for desalinated water is consistent with an applicable adopted urban water management plan prepared in accordance with Water Code Section 10631 or other planning documents. The importance of this provision is that it helps with determining the appropriate size of the facility So what volume of water is needed. It also helps with the appropriate site for the facility. So can it be constructed at a site that supports subsurface intakes, given the amount of water that is needed? The analysis from this provision helps the water boards determine that the siting and the operation of a desalination facility is the least impactful on marine life. However, we have received comments and have encountered challenges ourselves in interpreting this provision, specifically in the exact way that owners or operators can comply with it. So we're looking to provide more clarity on what this provision means and how an analysis would be consistent with an urban water management plan. For people who aren't familiar with urban water management plans, they're plans that are developed by urban water suppliers. They're required to be developed every 5 years per water code, a bunch of different water code sections, which I don't know all of them off the top of my head. And they ensure that adequate water supplies are available to meet existing and future water needs. It's a very comprehensive analysis, and we want to leverage these plans as much as possible for the identified need analysis. Topic number 2 is tribal engagement. Currently, the Ocean Plan does not have any requirements for tribal engagement. However, it's a priority for the water boards to engage with California Native American tribes. We recognize that their input can help us make better decisions about the responsible and sustainable use of water resources. We also recognize that it's essential to protect historic cultural resources along the coast that tribes have been separated from for centuries. So we see this as an opportunity to provide direction for both us, the water boards, and owners and operators of desalination facilities on what is expected for meaningful engagement and coordination during the permitting process. A similar but separate topic is racial equity and environmental justice. The water boards are committed to making sure that race does not predict the level of access to water or quality of water received. They are also committed to ensuring the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income. So again, we would like to provide some direction on the requirements for engaging with affected communities during the planning process for desalination facilities. The next topic I'm going to discuss is coastal hazards. So the Ocean Plan requires owners and operators to evaluate a reasonable range of nearby sites when they're planning their facility, including sites that would support subsurface intakes. For each potential site, the Ocean Plan requires owners or operators to evaluate various factors to make sure that they pick the best site for minimizing intake and mortality of all forms of marine life. The Ocean Plan currently does not require that coastal hazards are considered in this evaluation of sites. But it's important to consider these hazards in order to make sure that the facility lasts for as long as it's supposed to last. Also, other permitting agencies require coastal hazards to be considered, and so we think there's some opportunity here to coordinate this analysis required by different agencies to make the overall permitting process more efficient. So we're interested in getting input on the actions necessary to minimize risks to marine life that could occur from damage to facilities from coastal hazards, and how to make the analysis uniform among permitting agencies. Moving on to topic 5, this is regarding subsurface intakes and the feasibility criteria for evaluating them. The Ocean Plan currently requires owners or operators to use subsurface intakes for seawater desalination unless the regional water board determines that they are not feasible. And the ocean plan lists a bunch of factors that must be considered when determining the feasibility of subsurface intakes. This includes geotechnical data, hydrogeology, benthic topography, design constraints such as engineering and constructability, and project lifecycle cost. However, since adopting the desalination provisions in 2015, there have been varying interpretations of what constitutes a sufficient analysis of these factors. So we want to provide more we would like to get input on the level of effort and the types of studies that should be conducted for determining feasibility. Hope that this supports consistency among project applications statewide. We want to help project applicants with their design costs for this. And we also want to help regional boards in their review of project applications. And what you see on screen there is a simple depiction of a subsurface intake using a slant well that's pulling saline groundwater from below those. And related to the topic of subsurface intakes and feasibility criteria is subsurface intakes and coastal aquifers. Ocean Plan currently does not have any requirements for evaluating the effect of subsurface intakes on coastal aquifers. So we are exploring scientific research and literature on this topic so that we can provide direction on the appropriate siting and design of subsurface intakes to minimize negative effects on coastal aquifers. The image you see there on the screen is of the potential results on coastal aquifers when there's both a seawater subsurface intake and a nearby production well. We're interested in information about the effects of subsurface intakes on freshwater aquifers, how we might ensure that they are placed in areas where they will have minimal effects on coastal aquifers, and whether there are any management practices that could reduce the effects on coastal aquifers. The next topic I am going to present on is the evaluation of marine life impacts from the discharge of brine, which I talked about earlier, and the requirements in the ocean plan to quantify these impacts. So as I mentioned earlier, the process of desalination creates a hypersaline brine that is typically discharged into the ocean, where it may impact marine life depending on the way that it's discharged. The ocean plan requires owners and operators to prepare a marine life mortality report that estimates the amount of impact to marine life, both from the intake of seawater, but also from the discharge of the brine waste. The ocean plan has two preferred methodologies or technologies for discharging brine waste. The first is to commingle the brine discharge with an existing wastewater discharge. And so this effectively helps dilute the brine discharge and it has fewer impacts. However, there may be some incremental impacts from commingling the brine waste with the wastewater. The second preferred technology is to use multi-port diffusers. So as implied by the name, they are multiple in number and they discharge the brine waste at a very high velocity. And this helps it mix with the ocean water more quickly. However, with this technology, you have something called shear stress, which is where the high velocity discharge can impact marine organisms. So for each of these two methodologies, owners or operators have to estimate the marine life mortality from either the incremental impacts from the commingling or the shear stress from the multi-port diffusers. And the ocean plan allows the owner or operator to use any acceptable approach approved by the water board. We've received comments requesting guidance on what is an acceptable approach for estimating mortality. So we are considering whether we can put a recommended methodology in the ocean plan for estimating the impacts from brine discharge. We think that this could help reduce some of the back and forth between the water boards and the owners and operators, and ultimately, hopefully, help with permit or expediting permits. Next topic is volumetric annual reporting. Ocean Plan does not have any requirement for this type of reporting. The only reporting requirements for seawater desalination facilities is to monitor brine discharge and the receiving water characteristics, and to make sure that marine life is not being impacted. We're considering adding volumetric annual reporting and want feedback on the cost, challenges, or benefits of requiring this. The reason we're looking at doing this is to have more information on the volume of desalinated water that's produced in the state. It will help the state maintain a comprehensive water supply portfolio, and it will help the state better understand the amount of drinking water available to balance the need against all sources of drinking water. And it will also help the state understand the efficiency of desalination, or the amount of water that's produced from the amount that's withdrawn. So, next topic, we're on topic number 9. Got 3 more topics to go. So thanks for hanging in there with me, everybody. So this topic has to do with sensitive habitats and prohibited areas. The Ocean Plan currently requires owners and operators to make sure facilities are not located in areas that would impact sensitive habitats and sensitive species. And it does not allow for facilities to be placed within marine protected areas or surface water quality protection areas. And then also the Ocean Plan requires that facilities are placed a reasonable distance from these managed areas. So we've heard concerns about the proximity of desalination facilities to these managed areas. We've also received comments and concerns about placing desalination in deep sea habitats. So we're looking for input on what type of direction we can provide on determining the appropriate distance from managed areas for desalination facilities, and also whether deep sea habitats should be added to the definition of sensitive. Right, the next topic is compensatory mitigation, and more specifically, the timing of compensatory mitigation. So currently, the Ocean Plan requires that owners and operators submit a marine life mortality report estimating marine life mortality from the construction and operation of the facility after implementing the best site design and technology measures. The Ocean Plan also requires that owners and operators fully mitigate for these impacts over the operational lifetime of the facility, and that the best mitigation measures are used. The Ocean Plan does not specify when this report must be completed or when the mitigation plan must be finalized. Don't want to be in a situation where facilities begin operating before impacts are fully assessed, and before a mitigation project has been identified or secured. So this is a situation that would lead to unmitigated impacts to marine life. So we would like to consider specifying a timeframe by which marine life mortality reports must be completed and a mitigation plan in place, and are looking for input on the appropriate timelines for this, so that we can ensure the fewest impacts to marine life occur. This is the last topic, and then we'll take a break. Well, actually, I have a couple slides after this one, but the break is coming. The last topic is exemptions. So the Ocean Plan has a handful of, or has some exemptions that apply to a handful of desalination facility types. These include desalination facilities that are operated by a federal agency, portable desalination facilities that withdraw less than 0.1 million gallons per day, and are also operated by a government agency, and desalination facilities that are operating to serve as a critical short-term water supply during a state of emergency is declared by the governor. And since adopting the ocean plan or the seawater desalination provisions, we've had some interest in installing pilot technologies along the coast. And some of these pilot projects do apply for these exemptions because they're small. They are withdrawing a small amount of seawater and are portable in nature. But the exemptions were not intended for pilot projects. Pilot projects still have the capability of impacting marine life and legally are still required to comply with Water Code Section 13142.5. So we would like to provide some more clarity on what provisions of the ocean plan should be applied to pilot projects. We want to support the development of new technology in the state, and we don't want to apply the full scope of the seawater desalination provisions to the ocean plan, but there still needs to be some analysis of impact to marine life before putting these pilot projects in place. Okay, so that's the end of the potential amendment topics. Just a reminder to everybody, written comments on the potential amendments to the seawater desalination provisions are due at 12 o'clock noon on November 13th. You can mail them to the address on the screen, or you can hand deliver them to the address on the screen, or you can email them to the email address on the screen. And I want to point out that if you want to stay informed about this process and these amendments, if you go to our website, which is the purple link on the top of the screen there, you can just type in your email address in that little box, and you'll be automatically subscribed to the California Ocean Plan email subscription list. Okay, so I'm gonna stop talking for a bit, and let's take a 10-minute break. So let's come back at about 1:42. We'll open it up for comments.
Hi, for those in person, if you'd like to comment or ask questions, there's a sign-in sheet there and I'll be calling out your names. And we do have people on Zoom, so we'll be going between Zoom and people in person.
right, let's get start back up again. So we've got some people on Zoom and some people here in person, and we'll alternate between, well, actually, I think Gintara will start with commenters in the room. Yeah, okay. So we'll start with commenters who are in the room, and then for the Zoom commenters, we'll go in the order of raised hands. So if you are in the Zoom meeting and you would like to comment, please raise your hand and we will call your name to provide comments.
Okay, we only have 3 people signed up to speak in person. Rob Dolan, if I'm saying your, no? Okay, Glenn Farrell? Yeah, okay, you can come up here, or would you like to sit there?
Yeah, you can either come up to the podium to say your comment, or we can give you a microphone. Just the important thing is that you're mic'd. Okay.
Okay, is this working? Yep. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Glenn Farrell. I'm the Executive Director of CalDesal. CalDesal is a statewide industry association comprised of dozens of public and private sector entities, integrating the use of desalination to ensure a sustainable water future for California's communities and economies. Our industry has always appreciated the support of the Governor Newsom administration in helping to establish longer-term desalination production targets for California, and for his public pronouncements of support for desalination generally as a water resilience tool and option for water managers' consideration. And in particular, we've really appreciated the opportunities to work with our friends at the Department of Water Resources, who I see are here, and of course, you folks at the State Water Resources Control Board on developing and shaping desalination policies and practices for the state. You folks have always been open to engagement with CalDesal and our members, and we're really appreciative of that. So today, as you initiate the process for reopening the California Ocean Plan for amendments related to seawater desalination, we really want to take the opportunity to urge your engagement with CalDesal and our members on each of the identified recommendations that Jeannie just walked through and outlined in that scoping meeting notice and in the presentation for possible amendment in the California Ocean Plan. The CalDesal members, our folks, the folks who comprise our organization, are the people who are actually working on desalination projects, whether it be traditional brackish groundwater desal, brackish surface water desal, open ocean intake desal, subsurface intake desal, or even offshore desal projects. Members of CalDesal are the folks who have on the ground practical and technical experience in how these projects are designed, how they're built, and how they're operated. Our members include engineers, construction specialists, environmental scientists, consultants, and many folks with public works infrastructure expertise. I really implore you to lean on the membership of CalDesal for their expertise and their input as you go through this process. We desire to partner with the State Water Board in the process, not to be in conflict over the path of structuring amendments to the California Ocean Plan as it relates to seawater desalination. I'll just say today, we don't have a lot of specifics to offer you this afternoon relative to your scoping meeting. We're working on developing a public comment letter now. Of course, we'll have that submitted in advance of your November 13th deadline for public comment submittal. But as a quick preview, I just wanted to highlight a few of the priority issues that CalDesal is looking at right now in the context of the California Ocean Plan amendment process. Here are 4 of those, just kind of a preview of the things that we're looking at in terms of our priorities. Number 1, we are concerned that the siting criteria report from 2023 moves the state's seawater desalination regulatory framework and structure toward what many within CalDesal view as a de facto prohibition on open intakes. We are concerned about that process, that path that you've outlined and kind of reiterated in the construct of the potential amendments to the California Ocean Plan. Number 2, the identification of need for desalinated water. Who makes those determinations? On what basis are those determinations made? Are determinations of need paralleled in permitting approvals related to other water resilience projects like recycle water and potable reuse, stormwater management, surface and groundwater storage projects? Number 3, the timing and structure for mitigation. Will fee-based mitigation become a reality? Will artificial reef efficacy be more closely examined. We're concerned that some of the timing aspects for mitigation that are explored in the siting criteria report and the Jeannie spotlighted in the presentation are highly prejudicial against the successful advancement of seawater desalination projects. The timing is a major concern within our membership. And then number 4, development of a permitting structure, including for pilot projects for emerging and innovative seawater desalination projects that are offshore and/or deep sea projects. Again, I recognize that we're short on specifics today from the Cal Desal side, and that I've only previewed a very small handful of our priorities. We're still working through our organization to develop a meaningful set of comments to be submitted soon. But I want to say we're really appreciative of the opportunity to participate in your scoping meeting today and to share with you some of our priority issues this afternoon. Again, we look forward to meaningful, positive, structured engagement with you and with all of you, the whole staff and the team in the months to come to ensure that the regulatory framework and structure for seawater desal is balanced, reasonable, implementable, and still allows for the level of desalination in California that's envisioned within the governor's water resilience portfolio and the water supply strategy, and that helps to address California's real-time aridification and climate change challenges.
Thank you, Glenn. Let's go with the next person here in the room.
Sean, are you ready or would you like some more time?
Okay, that's a good point. Why don't we go with a couple people online? So Christine, if you are monitoring the hands raised, please call up virtual participants for comment.
Certainly. First up, we have Charming Evelyn, and next we have Jeremy Wolf. For the remaining attendees logged in through Zoom, if you plan on speaking, please raise your hand so I can get the queue ordered. Thank you.
So do we have Charming Evelyn? Would you like to comment? It looks like we may have lost her. Looks like she dropped off the call.
Okay, why don't we go with Jeremy Wolf next, and I will see if we can get Charming back.
There I am. Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can thank
hear
you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. My name is Jeremy Wolf, and I am the Legislative Program Manager at Las Virgenes Municipal Water District. We're based in Western Los Angeles County, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today. It's very timely to proceed with the proposed amendments to the seawater desalination provisions of the Water Quality Control Plan. This is followed by 3 years of unprecedented drought when the state water project allocation was reduced by 5% for multiple years. We really think that desalination should be considered a local supply when used locally and could offset imported water. And this is especially important during time of drought, and that will leave more native water where it belongs. A clear desalination regulation and permit process is needed to encourage the investment to develop this local water before the next critical drought event that we know will happen. We're very encouraged that the proposed amendments will include the methods for assessing intake and the mortality of marine life for traditional onshore desalination. However, we would like the proposed methods to include developing standards to assess mortality of marine life for developing technologies, such as subsurface ocean desalination. We encourage state investment in the study of desalination impacts to marine life by both onshore and offshore subsurface desalination. We also feel that it's really important to have regulations that encourage pilot projects to incrementally develop non-traditional desalination technologies that would be more energy efficient and also more protective of marine life. Pilot projects such as the subsurface desalination projects is very costly and complex when performed in ocean trials. However, these pilot projects also carry the greatest potential for incremental technology improvements that could fundamentally change current desalination. Traditional desalination is often described as energy and chemical intensive and non-economical to the majority of the human population to achieve human rights to water. So the development of subphase desalination would achieve more energy efficiency and potentially make desalination much more economical while being more protective of marine life. These incremental technology improvements would not be possible without regulations that encourage pilot programs. So right now, the State Water Resource Control Board is in a leadership position, not only to streamline regulations to use the current best available technology, but also make regulations that encourage and accommodate the development of new desalination technologies. Here at Las Virgenes, we're 100% dependent on imported water from the State Water Project. And we had a really big town hall where we had 1,200 participants in the 2021 drought. And the number one question our ratepayers are asking is, why aren't we implementing desalination? And it's a complex answer, but we want to be able to tell them that we're looking into it. And so I really appreciate this opportunity to speak, and thank you for allowing me to provide these comments. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for providing those comments.
Next up, we have Charming Evelyn.
Hello, this is Charming with Sierra Club. Thanks for having me. So just a couple of quick comments. I really wanted to have a better definition as what is meant by meaningful outreach, because we do know traditionally, although it is said, it hasn't been done. And so I do think that's something that deserves a much broader definition. Something else is, when you talk about, the water needs and how you're going to decide, this is something we need to take into consideration. What are the water needs of wherever the places that you're planning this ocean desalination? What is the per capita water use? What are the conservation standards? And are they adhering to the conservation standards? In terms of coastal hazards, is the facility going to be declared a critical infrastructure? That's not something that really has been looked at as yet. We're looking at tsunami zones, earthquake zones. Of course, I expect sea level rise. And you did mention marine life mortality. In terms of the brine, there are studies out now that you can actually harvest brine. So are there any studies or pilot studies to actually harvest the brine so that there is less damage through, marine mortality through the brine? Is that being considered? And when you talk about volumetric annual reporting, because you want to know how much water is coming in, when we take a look at the Carlsbad plant and how many times it has to shut down because of red tides, would that be taken into consideration? So I think there are some things that have not really been fully thought out as yet. And the other thing, again, same thing with Carlsbad. When we talk about mitigation, one of the things that occurred is that, yet the plant has been up and running, and yet mitigation has not even started yet. And the plant has been running for a few years now. So when we are discussing mitigation should be happening at the same time that plant is being built and operation has begun. And so these are just some of my points and questions. And of course, I am with Sierra Club. If I didn't say so, I'm sorry. I'm the chair of the Water Committee for Sierra Club Angeles chapter and co-chair for the Water Committee for Sierra Club California and vice chair for the Environmental and Social Justice Committees. So all of these things are extremely important, and Sierra Club will be submitting comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do we have anyone else in the Zoom chat or the Zoom webinar who is interested in asking a question? Let me know now, or we will go back to the floor.
Okay, seeing no hands raised in the Zoom meeting, we can go to our next commenter in the room. Okay. Oh, yeah. So Christine, can you bring up Sean's presentation, please? And
I am
then-
doing so.
Okay.
Okay, do you all see the presentation?
Yes,
Yeah.
we do.
Okay,
start
great.
by
Sean, just let
apologizing.
me know when to change slides.
Okay, great. I'll just say next slide. And I apologize. I feel like I might have over-prepared for this, but that's okay. Good afternoon. My name is Sean Bothwell. I'm the Executive Director for California Coastkeeper Alliance. Just to give you a little background on the organization and myself, California Coastkeeper Alliance was at the very beginning stakeholder meetings for the once through cooling policy, which was kind of the first attempt for the state to prevent and at least minimize the intake and mortality of marine life. So we did that through 2010, and I came on board and have been working on the implementation of that policy ever since. And then after the policy was adopted, we transitioned into the desal amendment because we didn't want to see the once through cooling policy be undermined by future desalination co-located projects that were going to use the exact same pipes that would now be just prohibited from the once through cooling policy. So I was the main stakeholder, at least from the NGO community, working on that for up until 2015. And then from there, we transitioned into making sure the Ocean Plan Amendment was implemented properly and the way it was intended. We had a lot of concerns, quite frankly, about how the State Water Board adopted the desal amendment. There was some vagueness in there. We thought there were quite a few loopholes in there that we were concerned about. And sure enough, those came to fruition with the Huntington Beach Poseidon project and the Santa Ana Regional Board's permitting of that project. And so we worked quite extensively on that. And then most recently, we provide comments on the streamlining report that Jeannie mentioned earlier. So a lot of what I'm going to say today comes from my experience with both the desal amendment and dealing with the permitting of the Huntington Beach Poseidon project. Next slide, please.
I guess I will click.
Oh, you can do it. Okay. I feel somewhat like a broken record, but I feel like it's been a while since I've said our position. I should also say, I forgot to say this, that I'm speaking today on behalf of Dr. Mark Gold, who is now at NRDC and used to be the director for Ocean Protection Council. But CCK's specific position on ocean desal specifically, we're not talking about brackish, not even pilot projects, but just ocean desal, is we really believe that, given the expense and the energy use and the marine life mortality, ocean desal should be the last supply that we're looking at, and that we should be investing in more sustainable supplies first, hitting our water efficiency targets, installing stormwater capture, and treating wastewater discharges. And I put all in kind of that asterisk because not all means not every drop of ocean wastewater, but everything that's feasibly done. We're not expecting brine to be recycled, but there's a lot of, quite frankly, waste of us discharging to the ocean. And in 2015, when we did the Ocean Amendment, we didn't have direct potable reuse at the time. We didn't even have the surface replenishment regs. And so we've came a long way with recycled water since 2015. And so we really need to be exhausting and recycling our ocean wastewater before we're considering desal. And then lastly, we do believe that in some circumstances, desal is necessary. And the hope is that by doing those other water supplies first, you can scale the project appropriately so that you're minimizing marine life mortality, you're minimizing affordability costs, particularly on low income communities that I'm going to get to in a second. And you can cite it appropriately so that you're not impacting protected areas. So that's our general position. And next slide, please. And we are happy to see that with the report that just came out, this quote from the report seems to mirror pretty nicely our position that we need to look at other supplies first. That the report talks about identifying need, but I would refer to it more as intake capacity and what is the necessary size of the facility. And I'm going to get into this But I feel like that was something that was pretty severely lacking during the desal amendment last time, was really considering the best available design and the size, the appropriate size for a facility. And then once that's done, really relying on best available technology and subsurface intakes to site and size the facility appropriately. Next slide. So in our written comments, we're going to stick a lot more to those 5 goals. I'm going to go a little off script here just to somewhat save time. But starting with section 1, the integrated water management, we really believe that a region needs to be hitting their water efficiency targets first. Capturing 85th percentile storm. This is something that's in regulations now as a means of compliance with the Clean Water Act. So I think it should be a standard that could be installed here. Right now, the phase 2 permit is being considered, and there's an alternative compliance approach there where if you capture 85th percentile storm in the region, you're in compliance. So if that's good enough for those Clean Water Act permits, I think it should be something that should be considered with this desal amendment. I brought up the recycled ocean wastewater again needs to be done. Again, not including brine, not including every drop, but everything that's feasibly that can be recycled should be recycled before we're pursuing ocean desal. And then lastly, and this is a fairly new thing, I'm going to get into this, is the idea of rate structures being able to protect rate payers. And I'll get into that in a little second, but particularly low income communities need to be protected through their rate structures. Next slide, please. So I was going to get into a little bit of why we feel like the integrated water approach should require those type of supplies first. And 3 laws just to look at. First is the human right to water and affordability issues. I think across the board, ocean desal is always the most expensive option available. And the state and the state water board has a responsibility to provide humans with safe, clean, and affordable water. And so we need to consider the expense of water when we're doing these type of policies and regulations. And in the Huntington Beach Poseidon analysis, UCLA did a report and found that it just makes affordability more of a problem. It doesn't help in any way with the human right to water. So looking at human right to water as a reason for doing this integrated water approach. Next slide, please. The next one, and I always apologize, this picture is always blurry, and I've Googled this so many times trying to find a more clear one, and I can't do it. So we're stuck with this one. Anyway, second kind of legal hook, if you will, is the state and the state water boards, need to look at, oh, my quote's gone. That's okay. I was supposed to say what your responsibility is, but look at public trust protections and waste and unreasonable use, including unreasonable diversion of water. And we've seen time and again that if we jump to ocean desal before looking at other more sustainable, more affordable water supplies, we end up with these stranded assets. And the best example I always point to is in Australia in the late 90s, all the way to 2012. There was a major drought in Australia. The government decided to jump to build 6 major desal facilities, cost $10 billion in whatever Australian money is. And by the time the plants were actually built, there wasn't a real need for the projects anymore. They had done things that could be implemented faster, better water efficiency, more water recycling. And so they put 4 of the facilities, they made them idle, and yet they still had to pay $670 million annually for the operation, maintenance, and upkeep, and loans, and all of the financing that went into those 4 projects that weren't producing any water whatsoever. And so, I always point to this as a cautionary tale of we really need to think about this. I could point to Santa Barbara too. I know it's been rebuilt, but they basically had to rebuild it from scratch after shutting down the plant when the drought was over back in the 90s or whenever that the first plant was built for Santa Barbara. Next slide, please. And then the last issue is Proposition 218. It's pretty clear from studies and a lot of the actual data that the State Water Board's been collecting over the years around the drought and low-income rate assistance, that low-income households they're not using as much water as more affluent communities. And yet Prop 218 requires that agencies only charge the proportional cost of the service. The issue here is low-income communities aren't driving the demand for ocean desalination, yet they're bearing the cost of the price for ocean desal. And so it needs to be something to be considered. And that's why in our position statement, there's the issue about rates. There's a way to design rates to be more protective of low-income communities so that they're not paying for those higher demand water users that are putting the pressure on the system to go to more expensive water supplies. But those rates really aren't being done. Some are in some places, certainly, but it's definitely not the majority of them. And we do have a serious concern that we're having these disproportionate impacts on low-income communities that are being, quite frankly, required to subsidize for the more affluent communities that are putting a higher demand on the system as a whole. Next slide, please. This is specific to what's already in the amendment itself. Just so everyone knows, part of the reason that identified need is in the ocean plan amendment comes from a concern I had, a decade ago, that project proponents would maximize the capacity of the facility to maximize their profits and to get out from under doing subsurface intakes. And so this was the answer to our concern, which I never really loved, quite frankly, was this tie specifically to integrated water management plans. But let's not get lost in the name of integrated water management plans or urban water management plans. The bottom line is plans where you could just throw any project on as just a list of different ideas that a community can do. That's not good enough to get a project proponent out from doing subsurface intakes or from avoiding best available technology and minimizing marine life impacts. And that's what we saw with the Huntington Poseidon project. It was just a project that was on a list of many projects. There was no rigor or accountability or analysis of whether the 50 MGDs was actually necessary for Orange County. It was just what the project proponent was asking for. And in the alternative, MODOC did a reliability study where they actually looked at, what's the most responsible way to spend our money? What's the most cost-effective water supplies out there? How much do we really need? They looked at these 4 scenarios and essentially came up with the Poseidon project just wasn't necessary. And if it was at a much smaller rate, much smaller size, and that it was the least cost-effective project out there for the region. And so regardless of what you want to name the plan, there needs to be more rigor around what is used to identify the need. Just listing it in a plan is not sufficient, and it gets project proponents out from doing what the water code requires, which is minimizing marine life mortality. Next slide, please. So I said this before, and I'm going to say it again. But this was one thing that I feel was severely lacking in the first Ocean Plan Amendment when I talked about the need to size the facility appropriately to minimize marine life mortality. And the first thing I got was that identified need thing, which I don't think was in the right section of the Ocean Plan. And I don't think it had enough, again, rigor around it to really implement it properly. And we saw that in Huntington Beach. But some of the other stuff that was put in there was put in kind of at the last moment. It's been a decade now, but I know one thing was added like the day of the adoption hearing. Felicia Marcus, the chair, Tam Dodak, one of the board members, directed staff to go back, not this room, but the coastal hearing room. There's a side little chamber, and they went off and tried to address all the concerns of the board members. And one of them was this issue of getting design capacity right. And they did add some language about intake capacity under the design section, but that was it. It was really only under the definition. There was nothing added to actually analyze or consider best available design capacity in the analysis. And so we see this in the Huntington Beach process. What the regional board did was they looked at every provision that they were supposed to do and kind of came up with a spreadsheet. Here's what the amendment requires, and here's our analysis. And there was nothing on intake or design capacity because the language that was added at the 24th hour or whatever was in the more definition section, not in the actual provisions itself. So there was no analysis ever done. There's also some stuff it's just scattered about. Some stuff is in the site section, some is in the technology section. There's a little bit in the design section. And I would strongly encourage that all those sections, whether you do away with identified need or whatever happens, that they all be done under the design section of the Ocean Plan Amendment. That section was always kind of not that robust to begin with, in my opinion. And I've always felt like intake capacity needs to be a big part of that. Because if you look at the law, it says best available design to minimize marine life mortality. Well, the best available design is one that's sized to minimize as much intake. And I would argue to design it so that it works with best available technology, which we would argue would be subsurface intakes. Next slide, please. Oh, this was definitely not in my. Is this the one I sent on Friday? Really? Can you skip and see what's next? What's going on?
Is that the last slide?
No, there's.
Christine, is that the last slide? Oh,
I don't know if I sent you an old. Okay, well, sorry, these slides, we could just go off script now because these aren't matching up with what I wanted to talk about. They're actually from a DWR presentation like last year. I'll just go off my notes here. So my next slide, I was just going to say that for the tribal consultation, we're not going to get into that. We'll leave that, defer that to the tribes, obviously. On the human right to water, racial equity, environmental justice stuff, I spoke a lot about the affordability issues, which we will comment on. I just did want to take a moment on Assembly Bill 2108, which I think somewhat gets incorporated into this section. That bill, which just for full disclosure, I wrote, the intent of it is for staff and the public to identify disproportionate impacts to environmental justice communities and tribal communities, lay those out for board members and decision makers before a decision is made, so that board members know what decision they're making, what impacts that might disproportionately have, and what might mitigate those impacts. And I know there's been a lot of, I guess, consternation around what is enough, like what does the water board have to do to be enough on all of that. And I just wanted to say, like, I really did see that as if the public brings it up, staff can add stuff to it, staff can identify their own impacts and their own mitigation. But really, if the public raises it, particularly in environmental justice community or community group, as this is having a disproportionate impact on us, this is the way we think it should be mitigated, simply for that to be laid out transparently for decision makers. One thing I get a lot when I talk to state water board staff in particular, we did a lot on governance a couple years ago, 5 years ago, and we were talking with legal counsel and some other folks about what board members get briefed on and what they don't. And a lot of times staff will tell me, well, there's trade-offs when it comes to permit writing and policies. Maybe we don't require as much monitoring, but we require this to be more enforceable, or this less enforceable, and we get this. And so my big thing is, if you're going to have those trade-offs, at least let the board members know what those trade-offs are so that it's transparent and it's in front of them. And so that was the same idea between 2108, which is, okay, maybe there is a disproportionate impact. The law doesn't require you necessarily to address it, just for the board members to know that there is that disproportionate impact on that community. And here are the mitigation options that either staff have identified or the public has identified. And, if the public doesn't identify anything, then it kind of stops there. It wasn't necessarily something to put a lot of onerous on staff in particular, just for there to be that transparent process for the board members. So I just wanted to take the time to explain that. Now I wish I had my slides. So in our written comments, particularly around the analysis or things we want to get changed. So today I was going to group the streamlining and the consistency, because I think honestly that they kind of work together. Things that will create more consistency for regional boards is going to streamline the process. So I'll try to go off the top of my head, but the main thing is the analysis, I think, is just always been deeply flawed. The idea that we would look at each element individually and then find the best combination is honestly impossible to do. You can't look at what the best technology feasible is without knowing what the design capacity is, without knowing where the site is. It's just an impossible task. And you saw that with the Huntington Beach proposal. it didn't get followed. You know, they looked at the best available site, they always made it 50 MGDs. There's no way to evaluate them independently without considering other things. So there needs to be a kind of a systematic order of how you would evaluate it. And in our opinion, the way it should go is setting a best available technology standard, then going to the site selection based on that technology's feasibility at that site. Then once you have the technology in the site, looking at what's the capacity. So if you're looking at a subsurface intake at a certain location, how much water, how many MGDs can a subsurface system extract from that area? It should be the best capacity intake. And then lastly, looking at the mitigation, and I'll get into that, but looking at really it should be, if you're already at subsurface intakes, just looking at the brine and the discharge impacts from there. Another major issue that we saw is the definition, the CEQA's definition of feasible in the Ocean Plan Amendment. That definition is so broad and includes so many social elements, things that aren't important to the water code and are not important to minimizing marine life mortality, that it really makes the Ocean Plan Amendment, quite frankly, useless. The definition is so broad and open that you essentially go back to best professional judgment for regional board members. And that's what we saw with Huntington Beach. So instead of the criteria in the Ocean Plan Amendment being used to determine whether subsurface are feasible or not, it was kind of a first cut. Okay, is subsurface feasible for all of these elements that we negotiated in the Ocean Plan Amendment? And then if it was still feasible, then the CEQA definition got brought in, and it again just brought us to best professional judgment for regional board members. This is where I really want my slide, but there's two instances in Huntington Beach that are really good examples of why the CEQA definition doesn't work, and they both had to do with site. So the site analysis at Huntington Beach went through 3 phases. The first phase looked kind of broadly at different sites that might be available. The second one dug in a little more and had a little more technical detail. And then the third was just looking at open ocean sites. And during the subsurface evaluation, one of the big issues, and I had quotes of like different things that kicked out these areas, things like construction impacts, stormwater, airborne pollutants, noise, public access. Those were all reasons to kick out different areas to evaluate in detail subsurface intakes, because they use the CEQA definition. And none of those, in my opinion, are feasible when it comes to whether you can minimize marine life impacts. And if you look at the once through cooling policy, it had a lot more of an actual technical feasibility threshold there. And the CEQA definition is too broad, gets you back to best professional judgment. I'll give you another example. In the third phase of the sites analysis, it was looking at, okay, maybe subsurface aren't feasible. Let's look at where an open ocean intake might be feasible. And there was a lot of back and forth for I don't know, months, years between Poseidon and the regional board about the site that Poseidon wanted, which is where the existing intake pipe is, and where it looked like the data showed that there was less marine life impact. And they couldn't come to an agreement between them. They hired an expert, Dr. Ramundi, who I definitely support and trust his opinion. And he agreed that those other 2 sites were better at minimizing marine life impacts. But instead of requiring Poseidon to move the intake, they allowed them to keep it. And the justification was, again, the CEQA definition. And the argument was the time it would take to get the permit from state lands to move that open ocean intake to the ones that better minimize marine life impact would cut into our profits, and therefore is not feasible under the CEQA definition. And if you think about that, that means any condition that would require the permittee to go back, and likely would, to state lands to modify their proposal, is now infeasible for you guys, the State Water Board or the regional boards, to require a project proponent to do. And so it does not work, and there has to be some thresholds and limits, and we need to keep into consideration what the water code is requiring, which is minimizing marine life mortality, not public access, not noise or airborne stuff. That's stuff that can be mitigated and is mitigated under CEQA. It's not something that needs to be analyzed under a feasibility analysis for subsurface intakes. My next one, I was just going to run through the analysis for subsurface intakes. And looking at the staff report in the previous desal amendment, it's clear subsurface intakes are the best available technology. They, according to the staff report, eliminate operational marine life mortality. And our recommendation would be to, again, look at the once through cooling policy. Once through cooling policy even said in there, in your own staff report, that we're setting a statewide BTA to help with streamlining, to help with the regional boards and consistency. They're going to know what the technology is, and that's the technology. And we didn't do that in the Ocean Plan Amendment. We came up with a preferred alternative. But the law says to set a best available technology, and I think we need to do that and set a statewide technology. There's numerous things cited in both the staff report from the Ocean Plan Amendment and the most recent report looking at affordability issues. If you look at the lifetime of the project and the lesser energy demand because you don't need pre-filtration, it's more affordable. The Doheny project, which got permitted much faster than other projects because they went to subsurface intake. So again, that gets to your streamlining concerns. They found in the MODOC study that it was more affordable than open ocean intakes and more affordable than the Poseidon project, even at a smaller scale. So I think the affordability is there. Falling back to the 1 millimeter screen, to be honest, is kind of a joke. I mean, your own expert reports say that the efficacy of screens is 1%. If you look at all the species off the California coast at all different stages of life, you get a 1% efficacy, and that's where the 1% mitigation comes from in the desal policy. That can't be best available technology. That's got to change. Okay, that's it for best available technology. Best available site, again, we believe, and again, the siting report says this, that the best available site is one that can accommodate subsurface intakes. We would agree with that. We do think that the aquifer drawdown issue, if it is going to remain an issue, needs to be in the site analysis, not in the technology section. We will include in our comments different ways that we think aquifer drawdown needs to be analyzed. We've submitted numerous expert reports to the Santa Ana Regional Board and to the State Water Board on how hydrologists believe that you can either better manage the aquifer to address the issues if you are pulling water from the aquifer, how you can just manage it better to make sure that you're not impacting that water supply, or from an economic perspective of just essentially paying people back or giving them back the water that might be intaken. Looking at pilot studies and doing wells to make sure that the modeling is actually successful, is actually right, verifying the models. We require model verification all the time, and yet in this case, it wasn't required for the Poseidon project. I wasn't planning on speaking on pilot projects today, but I think we are definitely more open and flexible to those, and so we'll think about how to streamline that process and put that in our comments. I haven't really thought about that up until today, but I think we are in support of that and in support of more innovative projects. I think the person before me from Las Virgenes, spoke about some. I think we're definitely open to more passive type projects that are offshore. So I think I might have some questions about how long those pilot projects are permitted for, so I can look into that and ask later on. But I think if the timing is reasonable, I think we're definitely open to kind of allowing that type of permitting. And then again, back to the design capacity. So setting a BAT of subsurface intakes, finding the best site that can accommodate subsurface intakes, and then requiring a best available design intake capacity that can be done using that subsurface at that best available site. And then mitigation should be pretty easy at that point. You would be mitigating for the brine discharge impacts, but there shouldn't be any from the operation and the intake of seawater. There's a couple things from mitigation that I think we're at least want to support that were in the report. You saw from the Carlsbad project that having an in-place functional mitigation project before it's operational is critical. I don't know what the status of that project is now, but I remember a couple of years ago, it had been 6 years, project still hadn't been done. It hadn't even been really designed, and yet it had been operational for 6 years. So that needs to be in place before moving forward with operation of a facility. I think everyone's in agreement with a consistent methodology for figuring out the impacts between agencies and figuring out what that mitigation looks like. I know there was some awkward back and forth between the regional board and the coastal commission on mitigation and how much that is. I will just flag right now, and I'll put it in more detail in the comments, because during the introduction, it kind of made me think about the idea of hazards. There is, when you sequence different agencies, there is this concern that if one agency kind of makes a decision, before the agency that's the actual expertise in that issue, that gives me a little bit of pause. An example I'll give is when State Lands was making feasibility determinations on subsurface intake for Poseidon Huntington Beach. That really was supposed to be the role and responsibility of the water board to do, and they kind of got out in front of that. And I could see that similar concern happening where maybe the water board is making a decision that's really a coastal commission kind of expertise thing to do. So I hear and I understand the need to kind of work together on that, but there is that concern of like one agency getting out ahead of the other. I think there's been a lot more organization between agencies since the last couple of years. So I think that can be handled, but that just popped in my brain. We do not agree with artificial reefs being a viable mitigation option. I'll leave that to Dr. Gold to get into in our comments. And then preservation is not mitigation. And I said that over and over again during the regulatory process. Regional board said that, it was on the record, and yet the regional board was allowing Bolsa Chica to be preserved instead of any actual mitigation for the impacts from Poseidon. So I think that needs to be clearly called out. I feel like it was clearly called out, and yet the regional board still went forward with preservation projects instead of actual compensatory mitigation. And so I think we need to spell that out a little more so we don't get into that problem again. Sorry, I must have sent the wrong set of slides, but I can send you the other ones if it needs to be posted or anything like that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Sean. And good job going off, no slides.
Jeannie, we have one question in the Q&A, and that is, will tribal engagement be with both federal and non-federal tribal nations?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are including all federally recognized and non-recognized tribes.
I do not see anybody else in the Zoom who has a question. If you do and have not asked it yet, please raise your hand so we can answer it. It looks like we're all good here.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for everybody's attendance today. I very much appreciate people who called in, who showed up here in person. It's very helpful to hear people's feedback. And we look forward to written comments. Again, the comments are due November 13th at 12 o'clock noon. If you have any questions at all, please contact us at, let me pull up that email address. Just a moment. Sorry. Not so quick with Zoom. All right, so here's the email address. If you have any questions at all, please contact us.
There was a question in person if there's a schedule for the process, for the amendment process you mentioned.
Oh yeah, okay. So the question was, what are the next steps? What's the schedule for this process? So we don't have a firm schedule at this point. We are going to accept comments, review them, see what kind of feedback we get. We're hoping that we will be able to release something next year, possibly. We don't know when, but that is our goal, is to draft amendments and release them for public review next year. That's about as much as I can commit to at this point. Sure. Yeah. The question was, will we be posting the comments that we received during the public comment period? And we haven't decided yet whether we're going to post them online or not. But I appreciate you mentioning it, and we will consider posting the public comments.
And the meeting is running till 4, so we'll be here in the room if you have any more questions. And Zoom will continue till 4 too.
Correct. The meeting is until 4 p.m. So feel free to stay if you would like. The nice room, it has Wi-Fi. You could work from the Sierra room. Thank you again.
Hey, Jeannie, Jeannie, I'm going to close out the recording now.
Okay,
We
sounds
paused the-
good.
We paused, this is a message for the recording. We paused the recording between about 2:30 and 4 as there were no speakers to place comments. And I am closing out the recording now.
Thanks, Christine. Bye.
Bye.